I'm Dr. Michael Feinman from HRC in Encino with offices in Westlake and West LA. And I'm going to speak to you briefly about the success with single embryo transfers. In the very beginning of IVF days, it became apparent quickly that the success rate with IVF was somewhat proportional to how many embryos were put back. So you could see graphs that would show success rate with 1 embryo, 2 embryos, 3 embryos, sort of plateauing out at 4. And the main reason we thought this was true was because a lot of embryos that even young women make are chromosomally abnormal. So in the early days, we were compensating quality with quantity. But still, even in the early days of IVF, multiple pregnancies were a big problem. And certainly, we had triplets and quadruplets in those days for putting in 3 and 4 embryos. Well, a few years ago, really at the end of the 20th century, studies from Scandinavia and England show that there actually were 2 groups of patients always existing side by side in the IVF treatment. There were women who only made 1 embryo, and there were women who made more embryos than we could select an embryo. And they were able to show graphs where the pregnancy rate was pretty low in the woman that only made 1 embryo. And if she was selecting embryos, then a single embryo transfer had actually twice the pregnancy rate as the woman who only had 1 embryo. In other words, being able to select a good embryo improved the chance of a single embryo transfer working. Similarly, if the woman only made 2 embryos, that would be her success rate, approximately twice of the other woman. But the woman who selected 2 embryos even had a higher pregnancy rate. And that graph started going up like that and evening out it. So at 3 embryos, they were about the same, and at 4, there was no difference. So it became apparent that some of what we were doing was based on statistics on 2 different groups of patients. And why am I bringing this up? Well, as you probably understand, twins and certainly higher order multiple pregnancies carry with them increased risks of prematurity, increased risks of cerebral palsy, a lifelong debilitating condition for the children, and with prematurity, potential complications from long-term neonatal ICU care. Now, of course, we see plenty of twins around that are just fine, and most twins are fine, but you have to take into account the higher risks that come with having twins. And so we've all been on kind of a holy grail of how to reduce even the twin rate over the last few years. Certainly our triplet rate is down, and that's a big plus for people. In the male couple community, we frequently get approached by the idea of the 2 men splitting the eggs with their sperm, half in each, and then wanting to put an embryo back from each man. I call that shared embryo transfer. And they understandably want to have each their genetic child, and because of the somewhat high cost of what they're doing, think it's a good value to get it all at one time. So the question is that really true? Because if there is a premature birth and the children have to spend many weeks in the intensive care unit, or God forbid have lifelong complications, those costs will be obviously wiped out by those situations. So what we have seen, we also have a gender selection program. So we have couples who have 1 or more children of the same gender who then come to us expressly for doing IVF for gender selection. In the gender selection process, we test all of the chromosomes, and these people almost to a person do not want to have twins. Once you have kids, you don't want twins. And many of these people already have 2 kids, so they really don't want twins. They understand the difficult nature of bringing up children, having the children, bringing twins into a house with children. They understand all that, so they frequently request single embryos. And we have data to show now that the success rate with embryos selected through this process, PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, have virtually the same pregnancy rates as we've had in the past doing egg donation with double embryo transfers and no testing. So the chance for a high success rate, low twin rate, and the added benefit of knowing that the embryo is normal is something that a lot of our patients are choosing now. So it's interesting because egg donation was the least group we ever thought we'd be doing PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis on, but for this purpose of selecting single embryos, it's proving to be a valuable tool. We're also working on an exciting project with a company called Oxygen, which is actually spelled A-U-X, not like the molecule. Oxygen. They have a camera that takes infrared time-lapse photography of embryos growing. And with their software, they can predict on day 3 the way the embryo grew, and they have a movie that shows this. The way the embryo gets to day 3 highly predicts which ones will actually make it to day 5, blastocyst, which is when we typically do our single embryo transfers. If this pans out, if the FDA trials we are helping with are true, it may be possible to effectively select a single embryo on day 3 and avoid the costlier and more invasive process of biopsying the embryos to look at the chromosomes. So that's sort of an exciting thing for the future. And at the moment, we're still relying a little more on PGD to select single embryos. How was that?
Questions?
Questions in the audience?
So the biopsy, you actually cut some cells from
Yes, so we now able to do it on day 5. It's called a blastocyst. The blastocyst has, it's like a spear, and one portion of the blastocyst is actually the embryo, and another part of cells that we can now identify are the placenta. So we take a few cells out of the part that will be the placenta, not the embryo, and then we can analyze them overnight, and on day 6, so early in the morning on day 6, we get a report which are normal embryos, and we can then select the single embryo based on both its appearance and its chromosomes to say which one is the best embryo. And hopefully we have more than one, we freeze the rest for future use.
It also predicts the gender, right?
Excuse me?
The gender. So
yes, we would know the gender. So in the family balancing program, those people come in, they already have children of the opposite gender. In this arena, the surrogacy arena, where there are no children, usually we don't encourage it as a gender selection practice, but it's sort of the loophole because we're selecting single embryos. It does give people an option to select the gender. I call it gender preference because let's say they pick a boy for their, so there's going to be some embryos that are boys, some embryos that are girls, and you're going to pick one. So that one embryo gets transferred, hopefully it works. If it doesn't, the other embryos are going in the freezer generally, so people are not going to be throwing those embryos out in this situation. So I call it gender preference because some people will come back and use the embryos that were not the gender of their first choice. But the motive is not the gender, it's the single embryo transfer. Kind of a loophole. But an honorable one, because I think anything we do to reduce multiple pregnancies is honorable. It's good for the couple, it's good for the babies, and it's good for the surrogate. The Center of Surrogate Parenting, whom we work with closely for many years, did an own internal survey and showed that women who were surrogates the first time were far less likely to come back and be a surrogate again if they had had twins compared to the women that had singletons. That's kind of interesting. One of the big reasons is that twins are almost, say, a 90% likelihood of a C-section. And most of these women who had had normal births before were now converted to C-section women, and they weren't happy about that. So if the women started out as vaginal birth women and could do a surrogacy as a vaginal birth, they're far more likely to come back and do it again than if they had to have major surgery. And you can sort of understand that. If I were a surrogate, I'd be pretty upset if I had to have a C-section. But that's just a little old me.
Are you expecting this FDA approval for this movie method of selection?
Excuse me?
You mentioned this movie method of selection, right? The animation or whatever.
Yes.
So it's waiting for the FDA approval? This method of prediction?
Of the movie, the time-lapse movie?
Yeah.
The data shows that the test, the method improves the selection of embryos on day 3. And
but it's not yet used, or is
it's not in use yet. It's currently in FDA trials. Now, why the FDA has to make such a big deal out of a camera that just takes pictures of an embryo,
right.
Even if it's wrong, who cares, you know? But they make it a big deal out of it, so they keep doing FDA trials, and now we're waiting. We were supposed to be in another trial, and the FDA just drags its feet with everything. I don't know why they're making a big deal out of it, but hopefully in the within a year or two, the camera will be on the market, and we will be using it to select single embryos without doing the invasive testing. Obviously, further work will probably be done to show that when it predicts a good embryo, that it's most likely to have normal chromosomes. We have to figure that out. But they're already showing that it does predict which embryos make it to day 5, and the pregnancy rates are comparable doing a day 3 transfer, doing a day 5 transfer, and so forth. So it's an exciting option for the future. Probably a year or 2 away, unfortunately.
Is there a name for it? Sorry.
Well, the company's Oxygen. It's AUXOGYN. And so that's the name of the company. There's one out in Europe called the Embryo Scope. It's a similar idea, but we've been working with the Oxygen company.